Welcome to My Life, My Business. Wish I was here. And last week, Shanaz, and in fact, in the last 2 weeks, Shanaz was talking about a bullet for my Valentine, and it's all about what are the factors, underpinning gender-based violence and femicide, and last week in particular asked me for really a response, yes, from a male, from a man, just to understand what is it that a man doesn't, why men don't necessarily participate fully in terms of dealing with the scourge of gender-based violence. So you can go listen to the playback. The edited version does not have that discussion, so the playback on Clubhouse will probably be better if that's what you're interested in. But the content that Shanaz delivered, really interested in that. You'll find in the edited version on the YouTube channel under the Mufasa Coaching Practice. Anyway, so my turn. And what will I be discussing today? Well, I've been thinking about, and we've dealt with this topic in so many different ways, coming at it. We talk about winning mindset and having a winning mindset. How do you win in your mind? Because it's this aspect of when you think about doing anything, it is you approach it from an aspect of certainly positivity, but one that already visualizes the win, visualizes the gain, visualizes the success. And there are so many, this is a very, very broad topic, very deep, but there's aspects to this. So I was just looking around what do various authors say about certain aspects of it. So we just have enough time today to talk about, in particular, an area that I found very interesting is like, okay, I thought about what is it about not having a winning mindset? Because if you're not having a winning mindset, you don't have absence of winning mindset and therefore a vacuum. For me, and yes, I'm making this claim, and of course it can be challenged. And therefore, if you don't have a winning mindset, then you must be having a losing mindset. And so what would characterize a losing mindset? And I'm just picking on one particular aspect, which is just from my point of view. That means there's something in what you're looking at that poses risk, right? Something that is a massive barrier in the way you think, and you already believe you will not overcome it. So in many ways, we have talked about the different aspects of how do you overcome this and how do you move forward, how do you build momentum, etc. But I decided, well, let me have a look at what certain authors say about having a winning mindset. And I came across a book by Mark Douglas, and he talks about, the book is entitled Trading in the Zone, and it's about mastering the market with confidence, discipline, and a winning attitude. And so I've just extracted one sliver, one nugget, and he says, key to having a winning attitude is embracing risk. Now, to me, and the way I think, it just distills it in this way, is not being distracted by the bend in the road and therefore slowing down to avoid that bend, but looking beyond the bend and actually learning how to accelerate in the bend. Now, all right, what am I talking about? I'm just going to leave that at that. So I want to now deal with this topic of risk. And so I started looking for something else, maybe a book specific to risk and what risk is all about and how to overcome risk. So I found a book entitled Risk Savvy by an author called Gerd, G-E-R-D, Gigerenzer. So anyway, I hope I didn't slaughter that too much. But the book is how to make good decisions. And it's interesting that a positive attitude, a winning attitude, which is part and parcel of a winning mindset, is how to then make good decisions and execute them, right? And how to make these good decisions is how we then examine and understand what risk is. So I'm just going to be taking through what Gerd says about risk, and I just found it really interesting. Now, he in his book says that risk and uncertainty are fundamentally different, and I found that so interesting. So I just took out some of the things that it says there is that risk, for example, is in any situation in which you have many alternative outcomes and are aware of them and the probability that they'll occur. Interesting, right? And some of those alternative outcomes are not probably the ones that you find are conducive or positive or constructive in terms of the thing that you want to achieve and the thing that you're hoping for. But just to emphasize is that you are aware of the many alternative outcomes. And these are finite. The finite alternative outcomes and the probability they would occur. And that is what he defines as risk. He says risk actually involves a great deal of certainty. You're not only aware of the possible outcomes, but also of the probability of each outcome. Right? So he skirts very close to the technical definition of what risk is. So when we talk about being risk averse, it's not understanding what risk is. Because, for example, when you play a slot machine, there are only so many combinations the machine can generate. A quick look at the design of the machine can give you the valuable information on the frequency with which each combination is generated and therefore how probable each combination is. So knowing this, you can play slots confident that you're at least aware of the dangers, since you can prepare for each possible outcome, right? Now, sometimes a situation only has one outcome, right? In this case, you don't face risk, but you're facing certainty. For example, when you place your hand on a hot stove, you know for certain that you'll burn your hand, right? That's certainty. This contrasts directly with uncertainty. That is, not knowing the probabilities of all possible outcomes, or even knowing what all the possible outcomes are. Now, this uncertainty may sound like risk. For example, throwing a dice, right? The variables are certain as there are only 6 numbers you can possibly have when you throw this dice. So therefore, you have a 1 out of 6 chance of getting the number of choice. Now, as a counterpoint, weather is often uncertain. Tomorrow, it could be rainy, sunny, cloudy, or windy, depending on where you are in the world. It depends on so many factors, not all of which are known. So, for example, throwing a dice means there's risk, but you know all the possible outcomes, the possible scenarios, and the probability of those outcomes, right? But when there's uncertainty is when you don't know all the factors, all the different possible outcomes to a situation. So I hope you're staying with me. And the next part of what he talks about is that people often mistake uncertainty for risk, right? And risk for certainty. So let's deal a little bit with that in a nutshell. Is then when faced with a difficult situation, people sometimes think they're taking a risk, but in actuality, they're facing uncertainty. This often happens when people mistakenly believe that they've accounted for all possible outcomes of a given situation, but have nevertheless missed something crucial. So he uses a turkey example. I'll just try and do a parallel one. Imagine you're a chicken. If you thought your outcomes were being fed or not being fed each day, then you might mistakenly have believed that the risk was simply not knowing which of these two things will happen every day. That is, being fed or not being fed. However, there had actually been a hidden uncertainty all along, because as a chicken, you've never considered the need for KFC, Nando's, or Chicken Licken. See? Yep, I'll leave that to you without further expanding on that, right? Just understanding the point that's being made. Moreover, people mistake risk for certainty. This happens when people falsely assume that there's one possible outcome for an event when there are in fact others. Therefore, they don't see the hidden but knowable risk in their decisions. For example, if your HIV test comes back positive, you might think the outcome, being HIV positive, is certain and thus become despondent and behave destructively. However, there is another possibility, namely that the test was wrong. This second alternative makes the HIV test a situation of risk and not of certainty. Understanding the differences between risk, certain and uncertain situations is really critical for good decision making. Sometimes you have to accept that there is no best option, so just trust your gut. Yeah, right. For us, and we dealt with different types, I don't know how that will go down. If you're a type 7, you're absolutely the enthusiastic visionary. When you don't have all the information you need and you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, where there simply is no best decision, does that mean you don't make the decision? Because remember, the context of this conversation is having a winning mindset. You need to move forward, you need to have momentum, you need to achieve your objectives, right? So, how do you do this? In order to choose the best of many options, you first have to be aware of all possibilities, right? For best options. But sometimes it's impossible to know all the possibilities. So instead, try to pick one that's good enough. Knowing full well that it's not necessarily the best. For example, now this is that the author cites. He talks about a friend that admitted that he chose to marry his wife over other women after estimating the probability that she would support his work, care for his children, and so forth. But what he didn't consider was that he couldn't know all the possibilities. See, he knew that he knew, he didn't know that he didn't know. So what he didn't know that he didn't know was that his wife would suddenly want to work full-time instead of staying at home with the children. Needless to say, eventually he divorced. So rather than looking for the best option, he should have instead tried to find a partner that was good enough. So this is the good enough principle. By focusing on what was most important to him, which was parenting, and then taken the first candidate that fit the bill. This might have saved him a divorce. Now, this is not relationship advice, of course, but it just makes the point, right? And in addition to looking for what's good enough, you should also place more trust in your gut feeling. And what is that exactly? It's that quick judgment that we can't explain, but it's so strong that we act upon it anyway. So decisions based on this gut feeling that you're getting are good when you don't have enough information to make informed decisions. So what we are saying is, when you don't have all the information and you don't want to go down the route of paralysis analysis, or analysis paralysis, said it differently, and in the time frame that you have, so there's a time pressure, a deadline, then let's say 60% of the information you have, you can't get the rest, the 40%. I would say then in this case, trust your gut. So and why? Your gut feelings are a form of unconscious intelligence. So while you might not be aware as to why you have this particular gut feeling, you can draw confidence from the fact that it comes from your personal experience and is therefore probably right. I don't know how that's going to go down with you, but it's all in essence that what we are saying is that optimal decision making requires you to actually assess all possibilities. As I'm saying, if you cannot, then use your gut. So here are some of the things in terms of effective decision making, moving ahead, being able to, as you process this, as you develop this winning mindset, is overcome these things in your mind first. Is remember, the other thing that we do is we fear mistakes. So he flips it and he says mistakes are nothing to fear because they sometimes can even bring you great rewards. And he says mistakes are just as much a part of the decision-making process as logic and probability, because they will always teach you something. You can improve yourself, as mistakes can draw attention to some of your shortcomings. So when you fear mistakes, you make decisions that are safe but are not necessarily right. So embrace mistakes. Don't worry that you will make them. Make them, because the worst that can happen is you're going to learn something. So risks are often presented in a misleading way that causes unnecessary panic. This is a little bit, I'm not going to delve too much into it because Shanaz, this is really in your area, it's research, it's statistics, etc. But just to talk about two things. in the way information is sometimes presented. It's either presented as relative risk. And what is relative risk? Relative risk is measured in relation to previously known facts. For example, 1 out of 1,000,000 people developed heart disease. And I mean, I've just plucked this out of the air. I'm not referring to any piece of information. Please note, it's highly fictional. But just to make a point, so 1 out of 1,000,000 people developed heart disease after taking COVID-19 vaccine, right? So the report then came out that said, oh, there's a 100% increase in the risk of heart disease after people took the vaccine. And that was relative to the previous time the research was done. And what did happen was when they took the survey again, they found 2 out of 1,000,000 people now developed heart disease, and 1 extra person who developed a heart disease makes it 100% increase. So somebody who looks at that and goes, wow, that's too much of a risk, I'm not taking the vaccine. The 100% increase, that's too great. But if you look at it as in the absolute risk perspective, which gives you a probability of the event, then you would notice, well, if there was only a risk of 1 out of 1,000,000 and that increase is now 2 out of 1,000,000, you're still looking at low probability. All right? So this is kind of the way to just assess these things when you look at it. How are these facts being presented? And are they presented in a way that paints the correct picture? Anything that you're worried about now, that causes a barrier to success, you look at this and you kind of go, no, let me just further understand these facts and the way they've been presented. Then I'm nearly there. With the right information and approach, you can be risk savvy. And what is that really all about? Just very briefly, because you go read the book and study this. It's a book rich in content. Is ask the right questions. And by the way, the author makes the point is that understanding risk isn't about having all the information. It's about understanding that you don't have it all, and that's the key, right? So ask yourself, in any particular situation, before you want to do something and you're assessing and there's a bit of hesitation and you're stepping into the unknown specifically, what don't I know? And do I know enough? Can I apply my gut in this way, etc., etc.? And then there are some rule of thumb strategies. There's a lot more out there. But the two that I was thinking about this is, does this sound too good to be true? Like, I'm about to leap into something. There's somebody has just pointed out an investment opportunity or another opportunity, and the returns are just out of this world. Your gut tells you. You don't have all the information, but something tells you this sounds too good to be true. Now, the adage is, if it sounds too good to be true, guess what? It is too good to be true. Don't do it. You need further information. This is where you stop and you say, this is where I gather all the facts, so I can consider all the possibilities. The other one is, quite simply, if you want to take a gamble, is tell yourself, I don't take a bet if I cannot afford to lose. Right? If you can't write off that money, don't take a bet. Don't take a risk. And then end off with, we have an obligation, if we talk about the future and leaving a legacy behind, as we have the obligation to teach our children how to manage risk. So invest in the next generation by teaching children how to make good decisions and developing winning mindsets. So at the very core of this book is, in a world of uncertainty, logical thinking is not enough to ensure that your decisions actually represent your best interest. Instead, you should make an attempt to recognize your ignorance, that the thing that you don't know, and find good, simple rules of thumb in order to make sound decisions in spite of complex circumstances. So when you've built up this massive barrier of success in your mind, start approaching it from this point of view. What are the facts? What do people say? Do I have enough? Do I understand what the risks are? Meaning, do I understand all the different possibilities and the probabilities of those possibilities? And also acknowledging that you won't always have them, right? Understand the difference between a risk, understand the difference between an uncertainty. And therefore, in your own mind, decide to win. See yourself go past the winning post and achieve your goal, and therefore celebrate that success, at least in your mind, in the way you've processed, in the way you've made this, in the way you've taken the approach to achieving your goal. And therefore, if you can do this in your mind, it's guaranteed that physically you will win. You shall have that success. And that is the end of my story. Thank you very much.
As you were talking about risk, so I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow on vulnerability. And one of the things about vulnerability is that vulnerability always involves risk. So the risk to be, yourself, to be exposed. Um, but while vulnerability is like scary for some people, it's really important for a real connection and being able to know yourself and that acceptance, that humanness, that we're not always going to know everything, and to kind of to that idea of embracing the mistakes. I love that. I think that often we are caught up in the fear of making the mistake, and so it prevents us from doing certain things. But yet we can learn so much from the mistakes. The other thing what I was thinking about as you were talking is about, the risks and asking all these questions. What I do find though is that when a risk is presented to people, in from my experience, it's often fear based, and so so when people are fear based, they're actually going with instinct, the part of the brain, and so that, or being able to ask all those rational questions, and asking the right questions often doesn't feature. So they either over in yeah, the brain, the important part of the brain is sometimes not part of that decision, when they're making those decisions.
It's interesting that you're talking about vulnerability. And yes, so considering vulnerability and associating with this kind of, in this context of the definition of risk, is literally being able to think about all the many outcomes, right? Is if I'm vulnerable, what could then happen? All those kinds of scenarios. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. I would die of shame. I could do this. If I'm vulnerable, if I'm open, these are the kinds of things that I can talk about. If you can think through all of those, that when you actually assign the probability of those things actually being true, actually going to happen, you begin to assist, especially when you say it's fear based, right? A fear, um, definitely. Um, Never mind the fear of the unknown, or the fear of failure, the fear that I'm going to lose face, the fear that I will be exposed, the fear that they're going to discover that, ooh,
Don't know
I've,
it, or that they're going to reject me.
yes, a rejection, all those kinds of things. But those are all the different types of things that you can be thinking about. These are possible outcomes, but how true are they? What is the probability of these things happening?
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting. I mean, I go through those things when I make a decision that involves risk. And it would be interesting, and I tend to like the worst. What is the worst thing that can happen? But I have to. It's very interesting. I find it that people who suffer from anxiety are unable to go there. Like it's such a weird thing now that I think about it. They really struggle, and it's helping them think a lot about these questions, but they really struggle to do that. But I'm not going to dominate this. I want to give a chance to Claudine and to perhaps say something. So
Oh,
yes,
okay.
so I just find, but I think that risk is absolutely necessary, to kind of to get ahead in life, to form meaningful relationships, and to achieve your goals. You're going to have to be able to manage the risk. And I think that some of us tend to be easier engage easily with risk than others.
It is, but Remy, and you know what I particularly like about the way risk is being portrayed here in this book is that if you sit back and you say, well, what's the risk, and therefore the moment you ask that is, you sit back and you imagine all the things, all the possibilities, the alternative things that could be happening in amongst the thing that you want the best outcome, but what are all the outcomes? What are all the positive outcomes? And the key would be if you can brainstorm all these outcomes, that means you're preparing yourself for actually then saying, in this outcome, I can do this. In this outcome, I can do this. I can take action for each of these outcomes. And then it starts to build your confidence that, hey, I am prepared, basically. And therefore, if I am prepared, I'm well able, or I am ready to take the next step. Because until you take the step, you don't know. You won't know what the possible outcome. You don't know what you're going to find. Actually, we can imagine all of these things and be imagining it, but when we take it, we can learn. Okay, I've done this, and sometimes I guess when I just, for by example, just from being in the UK now, is that you try something and you find yourself at the other end of the world, but it's not the end of the world. If it does happen to be the end of the world because you've taken that decision, so be it. But anyway, that's just a perspective I have. But don't be paralyzed. Don't sit in one spot and not go forward, at least in the way you think.
Yeah, so I see that Claudina said that she's asking a guy for very specific information. And she says she was wondering, it's because she see the risks of it not being done properly. And I agree with you. I ask lots of information. I ask the uncomfortable questions. Sometimes people don't like it. I ask the uncomfortable questions, and I'm prepared to say, I can you give me more information? I would like to make an informed decision about what you are asking me to do. And so I agree, that, and I love that we need to ask all those questions. And I tend to find that, because I tend to be a person who is, I think I can take risks, but I also need some information good enough. And I love that term, good enough. And that just makes so much sense. And so yes, I don't think that you're being hard on yourself. I think that, Claudine, that you want to make an informed decision. Maybe Jacques can see that, and he can give a comment to that also. And I know we're
No,
going over time again.
I'm going to wrap up quickly. I see Claudina saying, she's and I like the way she ended up there by saying, I'm learning it's okay to ask because she's just managing risk, and it's absolutely okay. Expand the range of possibilities that you need to be aware of, and if you deal with them, you're ensuring the best possible outcome. And this is, you've decided you want to win. Make that decision, and therefore you embark on this process. So it's one of those little practical hints for us. It's just little reminders, little pointers, not earth-shattering, but sometimes in the complexity of our world, it's just to be reminded of something as simple as this, right? The actual book is not simple. I can see it's very complex in terms of the detail that's being dealt with here. But in essence, deciding to do this today, deciding to carry on doing this, what's the upside, what's the downside? You go through different kind of models, thinking through it. You can think through, just to end off this way, in summary, when you want to consider things, all outcomes, you could do a pros and cons list, the do's and the don'ts. You could do a SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. You can do all kinds of things like, if you want to understand the environment in which you want to enter into, you can understand just happening. What is the biggest thing that's going to affect you, whether it's political, environmental, legally, socially, from a technological point of view, from a physical point of view, a geographical point of view. So basically you will just look at all of those things, put them all into that place, and you're going to, I've considered all these things. This is my best course of action. I'm going to take it and I'm going to move forward and I'm going to do it with confidence. I've decided I'm going to win, and now I'm going to actually do to win. So anyway, excellent. Claudine is saying that she's going to trust her gut. Yeah, very intelligent, your gut, eh? Millions and millions of neurons in your gut. It's a source of great intelligence. Right, especially to support that good enough. I have a good enough facts, and you factor that in to make a decision to go forward. So anyway, well done. We've made it very engaging and interesting once again, and we 7 minutes over time, but thank you for your time and your attendance. Thank you, Shanaz, my co-host as normal, and until next week, we await your topic of choice.
Thank you.
So have a great week.
Thank you. I will see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.